Hello everyone, good afternoon and welcome to our first panel session for Smarter Working Live Conference Day. I'm Domm, Conference Chair and Workplace Services Director at the Government Property Agency. Over the next half an hour or so, I'm going to be chatting with some workplace experience experts, all on the theme of returning to workspaces and what we're learning about all of that. First of all, though, I wanted to thank you as conference attendees and all of those who joined us at the Smarter Working Live month during February, because you've helped us decide the question that we're going to base our conversation around today. And that's about behavioural change, how it helps us to achieve a great place to work, but also understanding some of the challenges in this area. We'd really like to see and hear your comments, so do please use the comment space on the right of your screen. And if there are deeper questions that you want to explore, then please do remember you can join us at 3 o'clock for a GPA Q&A session, and you can throw all of those questions at a range of experts from our team. But let me introduce our panel. So I'm really pleased to be joined today, first by Kate Guthrie. Kate is Deputy Director for Workplace Experience and the Smarter Working Programme Director here at the Government Property Agency. By James Domm. James is Head of Workplace Transformation at the Nationwide Building Society. And by Brian Stanislas. Brian is Senior Inclusive Practice Lead at Civil Service HR, part of the Cabinet Office, but very much looking across the whole of the civil service. So welcome all. It's great to see you. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. So let's get cracking. So Kate, I'm going to come to you first, if I may. It's safe to say that workplace behaviours have undergone something of a radical transformation over the last couple of years. But what do good workplace behaviours look like? What do they feel like when we're trying hard to create great places to work?
Great question, Dom, and afternoon all. So I'm Kate Guthrie, Deputy Director for Workplace Experience, as Dom said, and I will jump into that question in a minute, but I just wanted to reiterate, I guess, some of the wisdom that you and Sarah said about how fantastic it is to be here today. And I've been part of these conferences from the beginning, and it's great to see how this one has moved on. But as part of this conversation I think that we're going to have now, it's really fantastic to see actually how ways of working have really moved on in the sort of 5 years that I've been involved in the GPA and the time that we've been having these conferences and working with all sorts of people from across the public sector. I think today really shows that we're into a new space, that smarter working is becoming embedded in what we do, and that we're really looking at the whole workplace experience. So really fantastic, I guess. But in terms of the specific question, so good behaviours, workplace behaviours, and what do they feel like? I think I'll focus on 3 sort of areas. So I'll start with leadership and leadership behaviours. Then I'll sort of talk about multi-occupancy buildings and sort of campus and the way that the government is going with new hubs and what that really means for our behaviours. And then I'll quickly touch on team and individual level. So leadership, and I'm not starting with leadership from a hierarchical point of view, but I really do think that good, strong leadership behaviours really is at the heart of everything that we do, and we need to start right from the top and role model these great behaviours. And there's loads of things that we could say around what makes a successful leader and what that means in terms of ways of working and use of the workplace. But I'll pick out one, and it's something that I think has been throughout the whole of the morning so far, and that's around trust and empowerment. And we've been talking about this for years, but it still, to me, is so important. Our workplaces now give so much choice to people around where they work and how they work. But unless, I guess, our leaders are really trusting and empowering people to use those places and workspaces in the way that they're intended, then we're never going to see people be as productive as they possibly can be. We're never going to see their well-being be as good as it can be, inclusion, diversity, etc. So I think for leaders, it's really about trusting and empowering people. And we've seen from some of our data that we've collected in GPA, but also through our colleagues in the Cabinet Office, that those with more trust, those that have more choice, is associated with higher self-reported productivity, with better engagement, with better well-being. So some real sort of fundamental things there in terms of how people work and how productive they can be that come from how much choice and trust people have. I recognise that this isn't suited to all roles, and we know that, and we need to recognise that, but I think that's still an important element. I think my second point around leadership is linked to this, but to me it's around, we all strive for high performing teams, and we've always looked over the years at how we can really deliver and drive high performance within our teams. But I think even more important now is the workplace element of that, and how the workplace can really support people to be productive as possible. So going back to that last point, so for me, leaders really now need to make it their business to know that what types of work settings, what types of places best support the activities that people are trying to deliver and the outcomes that they're trying to achieve. And again, if I think about our data, and it's very sort of general, but it's from a population of about 40,000 civil servants, we're seeing some of the more collaboration activities, so learning from others, social interaction, collaborating on project or creative activity, much better supported by our offices than it is at home or in other remote locations. And then on the other side of things, we're seeing some more of the sort of conversation activity, private conversations being better supported away from the office, perhaps at home. Now, as I said, it's quite a general sort of average, but leaders really now need to understand that and use that in the way that they work with their teams and how they encourage their teams to use the office. And then I think on top of that is another layer, which is around leaders really need to know their people. And I loved Jez's point this morning around who cares wins. I think we need to develop that really caring sort of side of leadership, because yes, we've got some great general information there about the types of activities that are better supported in the office versus home. But we also know that everybody's different. What might work for one person might not work for another. We really need to get to know our people and how they work best, what makes them most productive, and how we can then use the workplace to support that. So I think it's understanding, applying a kind of layer of caring then, and really getting to know one another. And making sure that the workplace is a real magnet. And we've talked about that throughout today, a magnet and not a mandate, that people are being encouraged and leaders are encouraging people to use the office when it is the right thing for the activities they're delivering and the outcomes they want to achieve. I'll just quickly move on to sort of, if we're thinking then about a campus or a multi-occupancy building, which is very much, as I said, the way that the government is thinking and the way that the government estate is moving. Big thing for me in there is around sharing. And Leah and Rachel in their session talked about this, how we can get people to share space, move from my space to our space. And the big thing for me is about being curious about the community that we're working within, the community within our buildings. And I would really encourage everybody to get involved. If there isn't a community within your building or within your sort of region, create one, make one. I think the activities we can do across government, across the public sector to build communities will really help us to be as productive as we can and to support, our citizens the best we can. The other thing I think we really need to think about is a mindset of spaces, not desks. I'm really changing that viewpoint, even changing our vocabulary, thinking about the spaces I'm going to use, the spaces we're going to use as a team. I think the more we can do that and get it into our mindset, then the more likely we are to move around the buildings, to move around spaces to better suit what we're trying to do. And then just to wrap up really on a team and individual level, I would personally say we need to be thinking about team and what we're trying to deliver as a team before we think about individual. And that doesn't mean we forget about sort of individual differences and the qualities we each bring. That's completely important. And as I mentioned before, a really big part of what we all need to be thinking about. But actually, it's thinking about how can we best work together as a team. There might be days when we're working remotely, we're working at home, and then there's days that we need to come together. And making that time to build connections with one another, I think is really critical. Working out where we work best together, but how also we work as a team. To me, Dom, those are some of the fundamental behaviours behind and that underpin smarter working. We're really starting to see that across government now. Key thing, I think, is going to be continuing to embed these, continuing to really focus on how we're successful, how we work together, how we share, how we can connect. I'll hand back to you, Dom.
Fantastic, thank you, Kate. I was reflecting whilst you were going through those brilliant points, actually, that pre-pandemic, typically we used to work very hard to try and make the workplace be something that isn't discussed at senior levels in an organisation, because it would typically be because something had gone wrong, or it's because it's a cost centre. And actually what has flipped, I think, completely is that we are having very senior executive level discussions about the workplace and workplace experience as a driver of business performance. And that is a big shift, I think. James, could I come to you for a perspective from Nationwide? Different sector, different operating environment, but how have you been going about creating sort of sustainable changes to the way your business operates and the behaviours that deliver for you?
Yeah, thanks, Dom. Good afternoon, everybody. I mean, for me, what's really interesting, I'm jotting down notes whilst Kate was talking. I think we've done a lot of work since the start of the pandemic with third sector, public sector, peer group organisations. And I think one of the things I take a lot of confidence from is we're all in the same boat. And regardless of sector and company, there might be different flavours of this, but we're all trying to work through the same challenges. One of the things we did at Nationwide very, very early on, sort of during the pandemic, is looked back at some of our HR strategic challenges. So they are particularly around, or specifically around, diversity and the diversity of our workforce, and what that means in terms of our membership and representation. Accessibility, and I mean that for both the way that you might go about your work for people with particular challenges, but of leadership and of a peer-to-peer network with internally, and really, really critically, talent pools. So we've really struggled to connect into certain talent pools, and that's both recruitment and retention. And what we have found as we talk to people across different industries, we're all fighting for the same talent. And we've started to think about how we can help different industries rather than potentially compete, and use people and the talents and the growth that we can offer to help others. But really, really critically, that is all whilst they are the challenges. We wanted to do that whilst maintaining our culture. So we did go out doing, as everyone will have done, the surveys and the interviews. But one of the things we've done is we have launched hybrid working guidelines. So, but we've tried not to be too prescriptive, and Kate did touch on this, so I don't want to spend too much time on what the whys and what fors of prescriptive versus non-prescriptive. But what we did find is different audiences need, I guess, different anchors and different certainty about how this might work. And that may be people that are wired in a particular way in terms of how they do their work and connection to the mothership and collaboration. It might be people with certain challenges or personal risks that we need to consider. So we went out with broadly 1 day a week for colleagues, until 3 days a week for people managers. Now, what I would say is they are averages, and we don't expect them necessarily to be all in one go. I've already spoken about accessibility and leadership accessibility and visibility, which is, whilst that is the only real difference we've made through our guidelines. But the thing for me, Dom, which is your question around sustainability, is we have encouraged people to have a conversation. And this sounds really, really basic, but we've pushed out, and this has gone from the top down, lots of conversation about communication, safe environment to have a discussion, to understand where people's head is at and what's best and works best for them. But I think, and again, these are common themes. What our people have told us and our leaders have told us is when you do come together, it needs to be purposeful. So collaboration, networking, social interaction, and career moments. And they are both the good and the bad, right? And we need to be really open about that. So we encourage a conversation, and when also people don't feel like they need to come in. But the one thing I would leave this with, and I think this is something that we should all look out for each other on, is the well-being piece has been absolutely crucial around this. So during the conversations and our toolkits, there's almost a permanent line along the bottom which just says, be mindful of looking out for each other. And I think in the day, this day and age, and the way that the world is, it's probably more important than ever to to just keep a really conscious view of yourselves and each other's well-being.
Thanks, James. I think that connects so strongly with what we were hearing in our keynote address from Jez at Bytes about, Kate's already mentioned Who Cares Wins, which, you know, I'm going to have printed and plastered all over as many places as I can, because that's just a fabulous concept. But that's within the context of building a healthy culture, and that meaning all aspects of what it is to help people succeed. Brian, can I come to you just to sort of for us to explore a bit more the importance of diversity and inclusivity, and how actually really including people and being inclusive can help empower all of us to get the best out of, you know, our workplaces and our workplace experience.
Well, thanks, Dom. Again, thank you, everybody. Hi, Brian Stanislas here. Yeah, so I can talk about this from different aspects. I mean, professionally, I am a member of the Civil Service HR Inclusive Practice Team, which for people who don't know what that is, it's in essence the diversity and inclusion team at the centre of government. But also historically, I was the chair of the Cross-Government Flexible Working Network, and I did a lot of work collaborating with people working on smarter working. So one of the key things, just from an employee experience perspective, was how smarter working linked to other things like staff networks, because obviously I was a chair of a staff network, could work really well. So there are a few things that came out of the pandemic which I thought were particularly interesting. One of the things which I learned from a lot of colleagues from the Civil Service Disability Network was how the fact that there was this mass working from home thing and the ability to have these fantastic technical tools to enable the communication between disparate teams was something, from the point of certain people who may have had health conditions, it was a massive advantage over what had historically happened for them pre-pandemic, when just from the point of that physical building constraint, basically this liberation of the working from home thing had massive benefits. So that's one of the things I just wanted to draw out here. So also in terms of employee experience, there's another thing that I think is pretty key. The fact that there may be people who want to work different hours or different kind of core hours. The fact that civil service has got fantastic flexible flexi time kind of work, and we've been doing this one for years and years and years. That was brilliant anyway. But the key thing for me is the fact that there's that innovation of being able to use the flexibility of work hours in addition to being able to use the flexibility of where you work. So obviously the thing I would love to talk about is places for growth, because I'm really heavy on the fantastic diversity and inclusion enabler, particularly from geographical representation of places for growth. But the key thing for me is the fact that there's the scope for a whole range of innovations, taking into account where people work, when people work, how people work. And it's something from a staff networks perspective that's been being discussed for decades, if I had to be really honest. I mean, I've been an active member within the Civil Service Disability Network in different ways for at least 10 years. So for me, there was always something discussed around technical capability for people to be able to access work. So that's not new. I was in a digital team for 7 years, so being able to have accessibility, again, that's not new. So for me, there's almost something that we learned from the pandemic, but also something that we were learning before the pandemic that can be innovated in a different way now. There's that opportunity. So that's the key thing I want to say, really, in terms of how it links to smarter working. Officially, obviously, in terms of the Civil Service Diversity and Inclusion Strategy, the team that I'm in own and actually promote mainstreaming of D&I from that strategy. And one of the key things in there is the ability to have collaborative partnerships using innovative tools. So again, you've got the strategic view, You've got the staff networks view. There's a technical capability, which has always been a challenging thing. But I think things are improving. But I'm a bit biased. I must admit, because I was in the digital profession for 7 years. So, yeah. I'll leave it at that now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Brian. And I think certainly one thing that has just come on leaps and bounds, it has been the investment in technology solution that have taken away, I think, quite a lot of barriers that, if we're all honest, we probably hid behind pre-pandemic and found reasons why work couldn't be done in a different way, when all of a sudden it could be, because it had to be. And there's an awful lot there for us to build on and take forward. I think linked to that, I was just going to come back to James, if that's okay, just to talk a little bit about, given the work that you've been doing in Nationwide, what can go wrong? What are the things that organisations need to look out for when they're embarking on this kind of journey?
Yeah, so I think this is just such an interesting question, and I will not do the answer justice. So I've sort of been thinking about this through the morning and as we're talking. I think the first thing is around being simple, and I've already spoken around how different people have different views about the world. They go through a change curve at a different pace, and I described Domm our hybrid working guidelines. In effect, they're just an anchor to start a conversation. So what brings the best out in individual teams? What do teams need? And Kate touched on this before. So I think, don't be too prescriptive and one size doesn't fit all, but try and use some simple terminology or things or anchors that just get people talking and starting this process. And that will be really key for some and not for others. I think the second one is just be honest and be transparent. So we often say don't stop greenwashing. Don't keep putting the rose-tinted glasses on all of the time. I think it's really important, regardless of the good and the bad and the journey you're on, to share. Align to the why. So I think that basically aligns my first 2 points around keep reminding people why we're doing this. And that is exactly why I started off with the strategic HR challenges I called out at the beginning of the last session. And the last two, I think we've touched on, but manager leader capability, we have to focus in on that. This is a different world. You can't manage and lead by presenteeism anymore and constant accessibility and a routine. And we almost just, and certainly in Nationwide, have expected leaders and managers to just get on with that. And that really is linked to my final point. And this is across the physical and the behavioural and leadership. It's investment. And particularly in across the civil service and the government, you will be very, very conscious that you can't do something with nothing. And I think it's great that we've started to have conversations at a really senior level. We are no different. It's at the board, like you say, Dom. I've spent most of my career trying to keep it off the top table. I'm now pushing it on. We need investment, and that's not just money. It's focus, it's mindset, it's senior sponsorship, it's buy-in. And if I was going to sum it all up, I think if you've got the investment, you can make the other points I've described happen because you've got the buy-in and the desire to do it.
Dom, I just wonder if I could come in as well on top of that. And James, I completely agree with you. And I think for us as well, it's around, that touches on all of your points really around learning and that continuous learning. And for us, we're learning in many ways, but one of the key ways is through our data. We didn't used to have great sort of data all around workplace and how leaders are supporting people in the workplace and how the workplace is supporting people. And I think for us, data, collecting data, reviewing that data, understanding the trends, and then making changes as a result and not being afraid to make those changes. If a particular workplace design isn't working, if a way of working isn't working, what is our data telling us? How can we improve it? And that sort of mindset of, we'll give it a go, because we still don't really know, how things are going to settle. I don't think we're quite there yet, but give it a go, use the data, review, continuously change and keep improving.
Oops, sorry, can I piggyback off of you, Kate? So basically, one of the things I'm very proud to talk about is how with the civil service diversity inclusion strategy, we are in inclusive practice developing an assurance framework dashboard to measure delivery of the 31 commitments within the strategy. The reason why that's important is because the data that we're using comes from things such as civil service people survey, obviously workforce statistics of the civil service. There's also civil service job systems. So in terms of being able to pull together all these different disparate parts of data systems into one very clean dashboard visualization where we can actually see how things are really going in delivery. It's a key innovation for making sure that the D&I strategy lands and is still landing and being implementing well for the whole of the 3-year life cycle of the strategy. So the data point is something I absolutely would echo across all three of us.
And Brian, I think we would probably all talk around making sure the data is the carrot and not used as the stick. So a lot of the work we do is talking about how data is our friend and will be very positive through this. I think it is a really dangerous place to be when we start to use it to, tell people they're not coming in enough. What does that mean? Consider it, the great conversation we've had. So I think the balance of almost carrot and stick in the way that we use data, I can't agree more with Kate and Brian.
Yeah. One thing I would say though is my it's not a bugbear, but my thing that sort of keeps coming back to me is the ability to have very robust diversity and inclusion demographic data declaration. So the ability to actually know what's happening with real people from the various views of protected characteristics is critical to be able to make things better, not just for people who work for us in the civil service, but obviously for citizens who are on the sharp end of our delivery. So one of the things I'm always pushing for is an enhancement of how we can get the best possible D&I data declaration and be able to explain to people why we want them to declare certain things, because I know some people aren't very forthcoming in terms of declaring.
It's a really good point, Brian, and it's really important in the surveying that we're doing of our customers using our buildings that we are able to understand what is different about experiences for different groups of people, and being able to respond effectively to that. And there's an interesting point in the comments from Helen about effectively about inclusive design. We work really hard to make sure that particularly in our new hubs, every space is accessible to all.
Yeah.
And that's what we're striving for. It's harder in some of our legacy estate, not surprisingly, but we want to learn, and we need to learn from the feedback that we get from people. I'm going to have make data the carrot, not the stick, the t-shirt slogan that can go with the Who Cares Wins poster that I'll have on my walls. Kate, I just wanted to finish off because there's another comment from Rebecca about the tension between our very strong view that it is spaces, not desks, that matter, and it is about a variety of workspaces so people can choose the best one to do what they're doing, and the tension between that and a desire sometimes on the part of people to be able to book their space and know where that space is, and to be able to I guess get the best out of the variety that we're seeking to provide. It's a difficult one, and we've been talking about it for a long time, haven't we?
Yeah, we have, Domm, and I think I've been around smart working for many years, and we used to really advocate desk booking. Desk booking was a way that when we first introduced desk sharing and we talked about desk ratios, we all thought, well, we can't do this without the safety and the comfort almost of a desk booking system. I guess over years we started to realise that might drive some of the wrong behaviours actually, and people starting to book desks and then not turning up and using those desks and freeing them up and sort of putting their bags all over the desk and then going into a meeting. And so I think the pandemic really helped us to rethink, was that the right way to be? I don't think we're still right yet at a final answer. And it might be that there isn't one single answer, that every sort of organisation is slightly different. I think in the GPA, we probably don't particularly advocate, desk booking systems. What we advocate is people thinking consciously and teams really thinking in advance about, why am I going to the office? What activity am I doing this week? Does it need to be done in an office? Could it be done elsewhere? Could I go to my clients, my customers? But if you do that, do that sort of conscious thinking, that will help you, I think, in your planning. So actually, yes, the activity I'm doing is about collaboration. I want to go to the office with my team. And I guess the next thing is do I have the security that when we get there as a team, we're going to have some space to work together? And I think there's a few simple things around being able to book the right spaces. So we agree that spaces, if it's the right sort of space and meeting space that you need as a team, yes, we should be able to book those. But actually, there's so much in being able to find a breakout space, a collaboration space, a cafe space, a far more informal collaborative space, just walking around your building and finding those that actually might better support you. So thinking consciously, having the background, the education. So lots of what we're doing is about guidance around, if you're delivering this sort of activity, you might want this sort of space. So being aware of that, I think, is really important. The behaviours, the practices, knowing that if you're going to get together as a group, don't do it where individuals need to sit and focus at a task space. And then if it is a space and you want to make sure you're going to work together, book one of the bookable spaces would be my advice, and make sure you're doing that in advance. But I think we're stepping away from the always having to book your space to really thinking about what you want from the workplace. And as long as we're providing the great places to work, which we are, we're providing that variety. There should be enough for everybody that's been allocated to that space.
Great, thank you, Kate. Look, that half an hour has gone by remarkably quickly, and I do need to wrap us up because I've got another panel to host in 10 minutes. So I'm going to need to move on to that one, but some really powerful insights there, I think, through that conversation. And there are 2 or 3 things that have really struck me. One about, I think, something about outcome-based accountability. Becoming the real focus of leadership, as the big shift. We talked about data and the importance of data and the many dimensions of data and the way it can support us. But I think there's also been something really powerful about team-based conversations, keeping the conversation going and making it an honest conversation. Really important sort of underpinnings for us successfully, tackling the challenges that we're facing. But we'll have to wrap it up. Huge thank you to everybody who's joined us on the call, obviously, but particularly to Kate and James and Brian for sharing your experience, your knowledge, your advice, your expertise. Really do appreciate it. I hope for colleagues watching us that the panel session has given you some food for thought. Remember, we've got another one coming up at 2:15, and that's on the theme of the future of work. I'm not sure we'll crack that in half an hour, but we'll give it a good go. But we've got another fantastic group of colleagues joining us. We've got the CEO of CIPD, Peter Cheese, Jazz Billen, who's Director of People at Ofwat, and Stephen Boyd, the CEO here at the GPA. And I think that's a fascinating conversation, hopefully to draw some of these themes together. Do please keep networking with colleagues, using the networking tab on the left of your screen. Keep the comments flowing in. We really do appreciate those. Just leaves me to say a final thank you, Brian, James and Kate. Fantastic conversation, much appreciated. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Thank you.